Hello and welcome back to SGTV. I'm joined in the studio once again by Marcus, or Agent Marcus, judging by the weird Bond-style footage we've just seen of your IP testing.
Yeah.
Is that how we do IP testing?
Definitely not, Ben. And one thing we have to get out at the start of the video is we don't, as a manufacturer, test our products like that. That was, like you said, just a bit of fun.
Not using a water pistol.
Not a water pistol. That's not recognised in the standards. But it's important to know that as manufacturers, the factory will test all of the products to the relevant IP rating in relation to the correct standard 60529, whether that's IEC or BSCN. So we just have to get that out there.
Okay, so yeah, if anyone's out there is wondering if that's actually how we test, using buckets of water and things like that, no.
No. It was a bit of fun. At my expense, by the way.
Yeah. So IP rating though, so IP, is it international protection with your bond style, or is it ingress protection? Which one is it, or is it just whatever sounds fancier?
Yeah, so the thing is, we laugh when you say like whatever sounds fancier, but it does seem to be one of them things within industry where people will use either one or the other. So the most common one really is ingress protection.
Yeah, I've never heard of international.
Yeah, so ingress protection is probably the most common nowadays. But again, quite common coming through the ranks is index of protection as well. However, if you look in the IEC standard 60529, the first mention of it was international protection. But it's important we note that getting the terminology right isn't a major player, because ultimately IP ratings are a code label, so people do refer to them differently. I'm a fan of international protection, some people ingress protection, so it's not like I'm saying it has to be international protection. Yeah, the important thing is we understand what the IP ratings are actually for. So
what actually are they? What are IP ratings and why do we need them?
So IP ratings effectively are just a coding system, Ben, and all that coding system does is define for different products the level of protection they offer dependent on the environment they're being installed in. So what we'll do throughout the video is we'll look at certain codes which relate to solid foreign objects, and we know you've got a very funny story behind that, and then also what we would say water protection against water, or the ingress of moisture. So it is just a coding system effectively where we can identify we're going into a certain environment and we need to install a product that is suitable within that environment dependent on the factors in that environment.
So the electricians that are going into the wholesalers are picking the products up off the shelves, and it says the IP rating. Do they actually know what those ratings are for, or do they just sort of like, yeah, that'll do? Yeah,
to some extent experience comes into play, and you just start to get used to certain codes. So an example is IPX5. So everybody understands normally that IPX5, the second number there, is relevant to the ingress of moisture. People get used to that fact that that protects against jets of water from multiple directions. So when they're thinking about installing in more common areas that we see day to day in the life of a Sparky, we just revert to that. Same way we just revert to using 1 millimetre squared twin and earth for a lighting circuit, or 1.5.
Becomes second nature.
It just becomes second nature and experience. But when you move to more complex situations and you start looking at regulations where they specify a minimum degree of protection, we do kind of need to understand what they mean. And we can look in documents such as the on-site guide, and that has some information regarding IP ratings, but we can also look in the relevant standards, etc.
So when we talk about ingress protection, is that
international
just
protection?
International ingress. Is that just for dust, or does that mean water as well?
It actually offers or codes protection against both of them things, but also against hazardous parts. So it's not simply just we're protecting against solids or protecting against moisture. There are other things at play. So if we look at, for example, the Millie downlight has a IP
65
code,
IP65?
Yeah, an IP code of IP65. So if we look at the first number there, the first number always relates to the ingress of solid foreign bodies. So that's what we're looking at protecting against. So if we look at IP6, 6 being the highest level of protection for solid, so it starts from 0 effectively to 6. 6 is the highest, which means it's effectively dust type. But if we go to, let's say, IP4, which would be the first number, solid foreign objects, that is no solid body can get in that's greater than 1 millimetre in diameter. Right, so dependent on the level of that number, the higher it gets, the more protection it has. So 6 is completely dust tight effectively, 4 is solid foreign objects greater than 1 millimetre in diameter.
So like an IP44, you wouldn't use that in like a bathroom? Or?
Well, it depends. So bathrooms are a completely different subject, which we'll come on to. But when we look at that second numeral, so the 5, that's in relation to the ingress of moisture,
Right, okay.
or what we would say the waterproofing of a product. So when we look at 5 though, 5 is actually jets of water, so it protects against jets of water from multiple directions. And then that sort of brings us onto bathrooms. A common place within a domestic dwelling is definitely a bathroom where we think about IP ratings, because in England it's classed as a special location. So when we look through the regs and other documentation to do with special locations, there's often requirements for IP ratings because we have the presence of water in there. Whereas a kitchen in England is not a special location, it is in Wales though. So depending on where you are in the UK, that will have a different terminology attached to it.
I wonder what's so special. Is it because that's where
England used to be. So
we spend so much time in the bathroom as opposed to the kitchen?
Yeah.
Who knows?
No. But so England used to have kitchens as special locations,
Right, okay.
but then they removed that part of the building regulations. But Wales kept that within theirs. So yeah, it sort of depends on where you are in the UK.
Okay. So solid foreign bodies, I know what we've joked about this, it sounds like something a little suspicious, but what actually is that? What does that refer to in terms of what can get into these kind of products?
Yeah, we have different scenarios, if you like, in terms of the number, and this is where the number comes into play. And it's all protecting against certain solid, or what we deem to be certain solid foreign objects. So if we look at the lower numbers, so let's say 1 to 4, they actually concern themselves with things like a finger. So if we look at IP2, 2 being the solid, that's nothing with a diameter greater than 12.5 mil can actually enter into an enclosure. And we actually get a rubber test finger as electricians that we can check the IP rating. Not that anyone has them anymore.
So you walk around with a rubber test finger?
Yeah, just poking things and stuff. Like I think we might have one somewhere that I can show you later. But again, IP2X is effectively 12.5 mil, stopping a finger from touching something hazardous, if you like, or entering an enclosure. Again, up to IP4 would be 1 millimeter in diameter. So anything maybe like a cable. Yeah, so a conductor of a small cable can't get into that enclosure itself.
So when you look at things like building regulations, when you're having work signed off, they might refer to something as an IP leak. Is that the same sort of thing? It's where they can see, oh, actually, this has probably failed at some point. Someone could poke something in there.
Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be called a leak as such. It would just be a non-conformity to the regulations, because again, as per the BS 7671, every electrical enclosure, the top surface must be to a minimum of IP4X. So when we look at that, that's to stop anything from 1 millimeter gaining entry into the enclosure. But when we go to the 5 and 6, which is the higher end of the spectrum for the solids, what that actually entails is now we're almost looking at things like dust. So we want to stop dust entering the enclosure to affect the components inside of that enclosure. So it's not so much about somebody physically not being able to put something in, it is that collection of dust, because again, my house isn't spotless. We all have that shelf or that bookcase where every now and then we think, oh, we ain't cleaned that, and the dust that's accumulated. And you think about if you're in a factory or the industrial sector, how much that dust can actually build up and enter into that enclosure. So that higher level of protection, the 5 and the 6, is more to do with dust entering that.
And if dust can get in, I'm assuming if there's, ions or something within that dust that could actually conduct
potentially,
electricity.
Yeah, if you go to places like flour mills and stuff, where they're explosive atmospheres, then naturally that can cause a problem. You can open the front of a DB and it is absolutely filled. So yeah, you have to be careful. We often think about stuff in a domestic setting. We do that as electricians, but again, depending on the environment you're installing on, will definitely depend on the IP rating that's needed.
So we mentioned earlier about places like showers where you put in downlights, and there's a lot of different numbers on things like downlights, like IP44, 65. So what does all that mean with reference to sort of jets and that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the common thing we have as and again, I was a contractor, so you always try and get that maximum level of protection, and you often hear people say, I need a minimum of IPX5, remembering the X, if we have an X there, that is a placeholder, and that just means that there's no specification for the ingress of solid. So IPX5 would be against jets of water only from multiple directions. But then you have to really think about the environment. And if we look in the on-site guide, Ben, it actually says that it's a minimum within zone 1 of a bathroom. So let's say we're in a shower. Zone 1 is
Me and you in a
physically.
shower.
Yeah. We'll practice this later. Maybe they can get some footage for it. But if we're in a shower enclosure, we're actually standing in what we call Zone 1. Yeah. Other than where the water collects within the basin, everything above that up to a certain height is Zone 1. So there's a lot of presence of water there. And actually, if you look in the on-site guide, it talks about a minimum of IPX4. And that's because IPX4 would be maybe sprays of water as opposed to jets of water. And there is a big difference. How many showers have you ever had at home where you think, that was a jet? Yeah, so you stood in the shower. Normally mine at home just sort of trickles down my back and hits the top of...
And then you go somewhere nice. And
yeah, it probably explains my balding spot where my shower just trickles and hits this bit. No, I'm not saying that. I'm getting there. So yeah, I haven't got a problem with it. But yeah, so we have to look at actually what a jet is and what a spray of water is. And a jet is normally a focused, streamlined concentration of water, where a spray is more of water dissipating through the air. So dependent if we have jets there, then it would be IPX5. But generally, if we don't have jets of water present within a special location, IPX4 is more than applicable. So
that's where products like these differ in terms of their IP ratings. Obviously, you're going to use them in completely different circumstances, but the IP rating makes all the difference.
Of course it does, yeah. And there's nothing wrong with putting a higher level of IP rating into an installation, because that generally goes down as good workmanship, because you're saying, well, I know what the minimum is, but I'm not going with the minimum. I'm going to increase the level of protection to prolong the life of the product for the customer. So there's nothing wrong with, just because we can put IPX4, I'm not going to install this downlight now because it's IP65. So yeah, you just can't go under that value, if that makes sense.
I mean, if you wanted to go belt and braces, there's no reason why you couldn't install something like this in a bathroom. Not that people would in general.
Oh, don't say that. 2.5 metres away from the edge of Zone 2.
Bathroom.
Yeah.
I didn't say how small the bathroom is.
Okay,
it wouldn't fit in my bathroom.
No. But so sockets, again, with the zones of bathrooms have to be a certain distance from the edge of the zone. So
ones like this, obviously we talked about jet. Like jet washing, you might use this if you're power washing the side of your house. So something like this, you couldn't drop this in a pond, for example.
No, definitely not, because again, that product there is IP66, so it's coded against the first number, which is solids. It's coded against the seconds, which is ingress of moisture. However, with solids, we said 6 was the highest number. With water, it isn't. So 6 still refers to jets of water from certain distances and certain power of that jet, if you like. But the minute we go over 6, we have 7 and 8. There is a 9 as well, but we often refer to 7 and 8, and then we start looking at being submersible.
So that's products like these, where you
IP68, where they're submersible for certain depths and certain time periods, etc., dependent on the IP rating. But definitely with a socket, you couldn't just drop that in. In the water.
Please don't anyone do that, especially if it's powered.
Ben said I could put it in the bath.
No, I didn't. No. If I see a product with no IP rating at all, should I be worried or?
Definitely not, 100%. So there will be lots of products out there on the market where they don't have an IP rating, because there's no need to test them, because they're used for certain environments that are generally not associated with the ingress of moisture or solids. So if it doesn't have an IP rating, doesn't mean we can't use it, but then we're limited to the environment we can install it in. So we have to look at the surroundings and where we're going to be putting that particular product.
But I suppose common sense comes into that as well. Not that anyone would want to buy an outdoor socket that isn't Scolmore.
No.
If they are and it doesn't have an IP rating, that's when you should be questioning what you.
100%. Yeah, 100%. The manufacturer should state on there that it has this IP rating. We often look for the British kite symbol and all of them markings, and it's about trusting the manufacturer that they've stated it's IP rated, which means as a manufacturer we must have tested it to the relevant standards. So, and
that might seem like a silly question, but we've seen it. You see all the horror stories where you find outdoor sockets, downlights installed into random places where there's no brand. They could have been picked up off eBay or a car boot, and it's concerning, especially when people's safety is at risk.
100%. And again, because it says IP on there, electricians trust it. Well, the manufacturer said this, but it's important. Again, we always go on about this, about having a reputable manufacturer who generally go through the processes of making sure they are up to scratch. So
you mentioned that some products, they might not have an IP rating at all, but what if it's got an IPXX with a follow with a letter? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we can also have it where the X is not classified. So IPXX means it's not classified or not necessarily not classified, it hasn't been tested against protection against solid foreign bodies. It hasn't been protected against the ingress of moisture. However, we do have letters A, B, C and D. There are other ones, but the most common ones are A, B, C and D. And they concern themselves more with actually something entering the enclosure and touching hazardous parts. So if we look at IPXXB, that is equivalent to IP2X, because IPXXB is again stopping anything greater than 12.5 mil enter into the enclosure to touch a hazardous part. So it can be said that that is equivalent. And when we look in 7671, it quite often says to us when it talks about IP ratings, is it says must conform to a minimum degree of protection of IP2X or IPXXB, or it will say IP4X or IPXXD. So they are equivalents, but they don't concern themselves so much with solids or waters because they haven't been tested. However, they do concern themselves still with the measurements and maybe stopping electricians and the like getting something into the enclosure and touching a hazardous part.
So for anyone out there who's unsure about IP ratings or the products and what their ratings are, what would you recommend they do?
So definitely always check with the manufacturers. The manufacturers will always state what the IP rating of the product is. Check within the regulations that you need to install a certain minimum, and things like the on-site guide will give you good references to what it needs to be. Lots of companies do guides as well to IP ratings and what each of them individuals mean. We could look in BSEN 60529 or IEC 60529, and that will give us a structure as well as to what each of the numbers mean. So
there's guidance out there.
There's guidance out there, yeah. And like I said, generally as a Sparky, experience prevails with the levels we need. It never hurts to go above and beyond of where we need to be. But yeah, there are, when you go to more complex installations, there are more stringent requirements that you have to take more into consideration. We often say, yeah, we'll put that outdoor socket up. We don't even think about the IP rating. We just say, yeah, it's weatherproof, it's fine. But there is always an IP rating behind these weatherproof products, if you like. So.
Yeah. So we hope this video has been of some use to you guys out there as well. Hopefully this has cleared some of the misconceptions and bits you're unsure of. Yeah. And as always with us here at SGTV, if you have any questions, please get in touch. We'd love to know what your thoughts are, what things you want us to cover.
And if you'd like to, write to the relevant studios because you've seen my James Bond acting skills and you think I'd be a very suitable 007. I'm in the bulking phase right now, so this will turn into muscle. But please get that vote forward, and then hopefully you'll see me on the big screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification button below, and we'll see you in the next one and potentially a James Bond film.